All right. So talking about mobility and improving your mobility. The great part about it is with the very minimal effort, we can really see vast improvements, but it requires us to consistently do it. So instead of thinking about mobility work as I have to do an hour each week, think about it as this is my warm up every single time I step in the gym. And if you do that, the reason that's so important is because it preps and primes your body to move better in your workouts. Because it's not just mobility work, guys. It's also about establishing that proper mind-body connection, those proper recruitment patterns for the workout. Because if you do all this foam rolling, stretching, and activation, and then you go into your training and you're not intentional with the movements, you're not focused on what you feel working, you let areas compensate, you're going to keep tightening back up. You're going to keep perpetuating the overload. You're not going to see that mobility work add up. So that's why it's really key that you even use this beforehand to help your body move better. Because what we are doing is we're trying to change those recruitment patterns by relaxing overactive muscles and activating underactive ones before we even go into those compound movements, before we go into our lifts, our runs, our cycles, all that different stuff. Okay. So it's one of these things that if we don't do this beforehand, you might find that a lot of times as you're doing the workout, you warm up and mobilize and you don't want to waste any of your workout doing that. But B, you might even compensate, especially if you've been sore or tight or whatever else from other things that day. So it's really key that you do this mobility work as part of your warm up. We like having that extra recovery day. We like doing the isometrics, or maybe we don't like doing the isometrics, but we do them because they're really, really key to improve that mind-body connection. And guys, don't say isometrics are easy. If you're not feeling the shakeage with this, then you need to make sure that you're actually trying to engage muscles harder. You're trying to get deeper in that range of motion, because isometrics are a great way to improve that stability and actually improve that neuromuscular efficiency in a way that, like Bruce Lee talks about it as the 1-inch punch, right? If you can hold your body steady and engage the correct muscles to hold that position, that's actually helping with that neuromuscular efficiency that makes you more powerful. Okay. So it's really key if you want to run faster, cycle faster and harder, all those different things. Okay. But talking about mobility and what it means. So mobility is true joint range of motion. It's the ability to move the joint through the full range of motion, which then does relate back to stability and flexibility. Okay. So I think mobility is sort of the most important part of this, because both of those other two pieces are pieces of mobility. So if you don't have proper flexibility of your muscles, aka they don't stretch the proper lengths, then you're not going to have full joint range of motion. If you don't have proper stability, you're actually going to have limited joint range of motion as well. It's why, if you have knee pain, we might actually be working on your core, because the thing is when there's instability at a joint, when it's overloaded, it's going to sense that instability and restrict the range of motion. Just like a muscle feeling tight doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually in need of stretching and overstretch. In the case of our hamstrings, a lot of times what we have is this anterior pelvic tilt. Our hip flexors have become shortened from spending so much time seated. And because of that, the hamstrings feel tight, but they're actually overstretched. And that overstretched position not only creates more instability at the hip and even at the pelvis, but it actually can mean that if you stretch, you're actually wasting your time and potentially setting yourself back, because you're stretching an overstretched muscle to only make it more unstable. Okay, so sometimes we have to pay attention to other areas of our body, and flexibility isn't needed just because the muscle feels tight. Okay, but that's what mobility is. It's the ability to move a joint through the full range of motion. Okay, this comes from the full prehab process: foam rolling, stretching, and activation. And those three pieces have to work together. One alone is not going to get you the same benefit, and they have to be in that build. Okay, so I'm going to explain why, starting with foam rolling. So foam rolling can sometimes feel really good. It can sometimes feel really bad, but the key is that you actually are able to relax with the pressure. And the reason this is the first step in that process is foam rolling is really short-lived. Okay. When you relax the muscle, it doesn't just stay relaxed, especially with all the other things we do. We usually tighten it back up. But if you can relax an overactive muscle, if you can sort of disrupt that mind-body connection between it and your desire to generally recruit that muscle over the muscle you even should, you can then better activate underactive ones. You're also going to help yourself improve that joint range of motion so you can strengthen through that full range of motion. So the first step is foam rolling or relaxing an overactive muscle. If you can take the pressure of something that has maybe some little bumps on it, great. If you want to dig in more, sometimes balls work better. The smaller and harder the ball, the more you're going to dig in. If you can't handle quite as much pressure just yet, you can do it on a bench rolling out, or anything against the wall. So any of like the upper trap stuff against the wall, any of the leg stuff, you can always go on the bench, even putting your calf up on there. You can also use a block, but the balls are going to dig in a little bit more. When you do this, okay, so let's just even use the lats for the example. You're going to hold on the area and then even do things to help move like different parts of the muscle or stretch and relax the muscle. When you tense and relax the muscle as you hold, you help the muscle relax and release itself through a process called autogenic inhibition. Okay, so basically what you are doing is signaling to the muscle that it needs to relax. So by tensing against it, it's tensing. And then by relaxing it, you're helping it relax. Okay, but you have to hold and you have to breathe. If you're tensing against it, you're just going to tell the muscle to stay tense. So it's not going to work out. So you do need to find something that's an appropriate pressure. With foam rolling, generally you'll see 30 to 45 seconds in your workouts. This is because this is a good amount of time to start to relax something to then utilize the relaxation you get in other areas. You can hold up to a minute. Holding over a minute might feel good. You can do it if you really want, but you're going to get no additional benefit. And I would say your time is better spent doing one of the other components. Because again, guys, this is relaxing overactive muscles. Not every muscle even is going to relax because it's so tense, it's so overused. Okay, so you're doing your best to try and interrupt that mind-body connection, and 30 to 45 seconds is where you sort of get that. So make sure that you're holding, okay? In the case of even like your TFL, I'm going to do this one because this one's a really common one. So you want to think that front side, right where that sort of top of your pelvis is right here, guys, right down there. You're going to sort of put the ball on that side there as if you're pushing into the hip joint almost a little bit. And then again, you would lift the leg, tensing and relaxing. And you can just fully relax over. You can use a bigger ball if you don't want to dig in as much. You could even do this against a wall standing if it's too much pressure. Okay. You can also put a towel down to sort of cushion it a little bit. But you want to hold. And the point of doing this is by relaxing that muscle, sort of inhibiting those signals, it'll make it easier to activate your glute medius if you really struggle, okay? So you're foam rolling to relax, you're holding on spots, not rolling around too quickly. You're spending up to a minute, but not over, because that extra time that you're spending rolling out, you could be doing the other two components. If you find that something even gets tight again during your workout because you start to feel things compensating, so to help yourself in your squat, to help yourself in your deadlift, don't be afraid to roll out in between rounds of that actual exercise, because foam rolling will not reduce your power output like static stretching has actually been shown to do. That's why we also have to understand there's nuance to things, right? People that say, oh, don't stretch, it reduces your power. No, static stretching reduces your power. Dynamic stretching actually helps mobilize joints, warms up your body, okay? But you're foam rolling, okay? Don't be afraid to also like use the wall and use the bench. So in terms of the bench, it can help you dig into your hamstring. So placing the ball here. And guys, as you hold, don't just do one spot, like move it around, be like, okay, where else in my hamstring is tight? Okay, I found the spot that's tight, then spend time there even, okay? Or if you do need to against a wall, again, you can always put the ball in your upper back against the wall, okay, and roll out. You can do it even on your hip against the wall if you need to, but try and relax whatever you're rolling out, because that's how you help the muscle relax and release itself, okay? After you foam roll, you're going to stretch. And again, this is where the type of stretching you use is really key. We might use some static stretching post-workout where we're working a little bit more just on flexibility gains and maintaining those after being really warm. But we're going to use dynamic stretching in our warm-up to mobilize joints and actually get our blood pumping a bit. Because as I mentioned already, in case you missed it, like sometimes you go into your workout, right? And after a few rounds of stuff, you feel a lot looser. We want to go in from the first round feeling good, and that means using dynamic stretching. So stretching not only mobilizes joints and improves muscle flexibility to return muscles to their proper length tension relationship, but it actually warms up the body and it activates. Okay, so this is where we're getting into some of these other components. So when you're doing stretching, you need to be very conscious of what you feel working. A lot of times I'll actually see people do like rotational things like this, and they don't actually rotate through their spine, right? They're just trying to seek out all the mobility from their shoulder. So as you do these stretches and you think about what's supposed to be working, think about what should be actually stretching out the opposing muscle group. So as you're doing this, think about engaging your upper back to actually get the twist, to open up your chest, right? Don't just move from your shoulder, because again, that's where I see rotator cuff stuff actually happening. I see people being like, well, my mobility is not improving, you know, like why am I still overusing the wrong muscles? And it's because we're not intentional, right? If you're doing a hip flexor stretch, don't just like go through the motion, you know, like arching your back, right? Because you're only arching your back. Think about actually squeezing your glute to drive your hip into extension, because by engaging that opposing muscle group, not only are you getting some glute activation here, but you're actually driving the hip into true extension versus seeking out mobility from other areas. You'll notice you do this. So you have to be intentional during your stretching even, guys. You can't just go through the motions. I know you just want to get the workout done, but watch even here. Are you doing like this as you're rotating open, right? Because that's creating space and not actually causing you to have to get the mobility out of the area you're supposed to. Our body is good at cheating. Okay, it's why we have injuries when our form looks really good. It's because our body cheats by trying to seek out mobility or use muscles that it shouldn't actually use to perform the movements we're asking it to perform. So be very intentional as you go through the stretching, even focused on what you feel working, and ask us if you have questions, video things that you aren't familiar with, just so we can make sure that you're getting more out of them. Okay, but focus on the opposing muscle group driving the stretch. Focus on actually your foot's connection to the ground, your hands connection to the ground, and actually doing the stretch and stretching and feeling what you should feel stretching, right? Don't just go through the motions being like, well, at least I'm getting warmed up, right? Because then you're going to end up going like through this and you're going to just like do this, right? Even the hamstring thing, because when you do your hamstring stretch, don't just go like this. Even this one, right? I see all the time people just rounding over, not actually stretching their hamstrings. Our hamstrings are stretched through that nice hip hinge, right? And if you're going to be doing any deadlift, warm up that hip hinge movement pattern. Think about loading those glutes. Think about trying to create the stretch. Don't just think about reaching further, okay? Be intentional with every move you do so you get the most out of it, okay? So after dynamic stretching and focusing on really not cheating, getting the most out of it, you're going to go into activation. So activation is sort of taking the stretching and flipping it, right? So there are two sides of the same coin, because with stretching, our focus is a little bit more on mobilizing the joints. It's a little bit more on the flexibility of muscles. Activation, we're going to take that same principle and we're still stretching here, but we're going to focus more on activating the underactive muscles. And it's very, very key with activation that you do really easy isolation moves for higher reps. And it's really, really key that you feel the correct muscle working and that you don't say, oh, this one's too easy, I should be adding loads, because you shouldn't, okay? If you cannot do the basic bodyweight glute bridge and feel your glutes working, you are not above that move. You need to work on that move more, okay? That's what I'm gonna tell you right now. Activation isn't about progressive overload. Activation is about that mind-body connection and the neuromuscular efficiency. That means the more efficient you are, the more you can recruit the muscles very, very quickly without anything to assist you, AKA cheating and actually adding loads, okay? So when you do this basic bodyweight glute bridge, if you cannot say, hey, I feel my butt cheeks from the first one, you have work to do, okay? Not your hamstrings, not your lower back, your butt cheeks, okay? It is not that your hamstrings are not assisting during glute bridging, but this is a glutes as a prime mover, which should mean that when you do this glute bridge, the first thing you feel firing is your glutes. If not, we can share some coaching videos on that bridge. With any of these moves, reverse hyper, right? This is a great test to see how actually efficient you are at recruiting your glutes. If you cannot use your glute to power that move and you feel your hamstring taking over, we got work to do. If you feel your lower back, we got work to do. The super most isolation movement, right? You're literally like hyperextending your hip barely, because we don't have that many degrees there, barely, right? You're barely moving. But if you cannot activate that glute to perform that movement, you got some issues. Can you expect your glute to work efficiently when you run and all these other muscles having to work together, right? When you squat, when you deadlift, you can't. So that's why we need to do these isolation moves, okay? With activation, we are isolating a lot of times and we're involving very few joints, we're involving very few muscles because we want to establish that mind-body connection. Because if you can actually recruit your glute quickly there and you feel that pump and burn, it's going to be a lot easier than to use it during the compound movements, okay? You still have to be intentional with the compound movements to see if that mind-body connection shuts off. If you start to compensate, go back to old recruitment patterns, because we will as we fatigue. But it's one of these things that you want to use that to establish a mind-body connection. And again, by engaging your glute, what are you doing? You're stretching out your hip flexors. But you want those activation moves to be very isolated, okay? And they're going to, again, serve through a process called reciprocal inhibition of stretches still too, to mobilize the joints, okay? But also improve the joint stability. So right in this warm up, we're getting all the components of mobility. We're improving flexibility. We're also improving stability so that everything works better. We can recruit things in the correct order. Okay, because that's how we get stronger. Stronger isn't just picking weight up off the ground, guys. It's about neuromuscular efficiency, the ability to recruit the correct muscles in the correct orders to the correct extents. That's what makes you run faster. That's what helps you cycle further. That's what helps you lift more, okay? So with activation, think isolation moves. If you're doing in the higher rep, we might have you add in, because yes, moves do get easier, but just because a move is easy doesn't mean you shouldn't be able to go back to it. You should always be able to go back to that basic bodyweight glute bridge and make it challenging through activating more muscle fibers with your mind. But we might use some different tools, especially if you do struggle, guys, because you might find with certain muscle groups, you struggle in different postures, right? That by doing the glute bridge off the ground, you're great, but the second you put your heels up on a bench, all of a sudden, you know, you can't get your glutes to fire, you only feel your hamstrings. Or you might feel right now that you can't get your glutes to fire in the basic bodyweight glute bridge. And maybe we do add a mini band around your legs, because by adding the mini band, what you're now doing, guys, is you're engaging the glute medius. And sometimes when we engage the glute medius, it helps the glute max fire better because there's more hip stability. So when you do this and you push out, you actually should feel your side butt engage, okay? And that can help your glute max engage as well. When you're doing this though, this is where we tend to compensate, where we tend to do monster walks. Maybe people have seen these, right? You've done these in the gym, and then you're going like, whoo, like this, like, oh yeah, burn so good. So proud of yourself. Don't be proud of yourself. If you're rubbing right here, your TFL is compensating for your glute medius. You have issues and we got to work on that, right? That's where the foam rolling prior can help relax the TFL. That's where the joint mobilization can help relax the TFL and help mobilize the joints so that this muscle does not compensate and is instead assisting the glute medius, right? And then that's where we might do different postures. Maybe you can't yet control this monster walk, okay? Maybe we have to take it down to the ground, and maybe we have to really do things like turning the top toe down so that we can internally rotate that tibia to help inhibit that glute, or sorry, the TFL a little bit more, to activate the glute medius a little more. I'm gonna kick the bench. So we might have you kick back even, because kicking back will help you slightly engage the glute max, which might help you engage the glute med here, right? But we might change postures and do different movements because you don't yet have that mind-body connection in certain things. And even by doing, say, that one prior and then going back to the monster walk, you might be like, okay, now I can feel my glutes. But you gotta slow things down. You gotta really focus on what you feel working, because simply doing the right moves isn't enough, because we're really good at compensating, okay? We're really good at finding the path of least resistance to perform the movement pattern that our body is being asked to do, and that's where we compensate. You might even use bands, to work on the scapular mobility and different things like that, right? These little tools help add a little resistance to help that mind-body connection, to create a little progression, because we do want some progression. We're not going for progressive overload like we will in our workouts. We do want some progression to keep challenging our body and making sure that we're really establishing that mind-body connection, okay? I also brought out the sliders because sometimes we need to regress to progress. That's why I say always go back to the basic bodyweight glute bridge. If you don't have that in there, every once in a while, guys, throw it in there for yourself. But let's say bird dogs. Okay, I see this one a lot where people actually try and get a bigger range of motion, right? To think about making it harder, they're arching. Sometimes we need to take out components of movements so that we can actually focus on what we feel working. So if you're doing a move and you notice, hey, I'm not feeling the correct areas, right? I'm doing this bird dog and I'm feeling my lower back. Put the slider underneath your foot. You can use a paper plate or a towel on a hardwood floor or whatever, but instead of lifting up, kick back, right? Because this might allow you, because you're not trying to lift up, to focus less on height and more on that hip extension, squeezing that glute as you drive back, right? Sometimes we have to take out some of the components of movements to make sure that we're actually addressing each component and using the correct muscles. And then after you get done with your foam rolling, stretching, and activation, you're going to go into your workout. Guys, this doesn't have to be super long. We want to even pick maybe one area. Like if you're doing a lower body move, maybe you just roll out your TFL. Maybe your ankle mobility is poopy and you just roll out your calves, right? Especially the more you know areas. If you're really, really short on time, A, talk to us, but B, know that you can always go down to the bare minimum and just address one or two areas. Do calf foam rolling, world's greatest stretch, basic bodyweight glute bridge. Maybe, you do a camel glute bridge because you really want to address, even some pec tightness because you've been sitting a lot, right? There's 3 moves, okay? So something is better than nothing. And the reason I bring this back to that is because something done consistently to make you move better in your workouts is going to add up a lot more than skipping it every day and doing one day of mobility work. Because once you go into your training, you want everything to fire correctly. And if you notice that things aren't, and every move is an assessment, as you add loads to your squats, as you add loads to your lunges, things are going to shift and change, not only as you become fatigued, but because at a certain weight, your weak links are going to come out, right? You might not be able to compensate, or something might shut off enough, right? Like I always fill my squats because I know at some point I might start to shift a little bit because I'm fatigued, or even because my glute just shuts off because I had an ankle injury on that side. And I know at some point it does, right? It's one of these things that we want to be aware of those things, to be intentional with our training, to then maybe roll out in between a round or do a little extra activation, or say, hey, I know I need to stop here and I need to do a little extra work on this in my accessory work and do maybe one more round on that side of something, or an extra round of activation at the end, okay? To help sort of that side catch up. But you need to be intentional with your training. And by doing this warm up, you prep your body to move better. Okay. Whether or not it's running, whether or not it's cycling, whether or not it's swimming, you need to do this beforehand. Okay. Then with everything, film. Okay. If you have a camera and you have a wall, you put, or your phone, sorry, not even a camera, a phone against the wall, you do it, you flip it into selfie mode, you put it up there. You can take a video of yourself. Okay. You can stare awkwardly at it to make sure you're in there. You can use a block. You could even stack it against the roller, but stack it somewhere and film yourself, guys, because this not only helps you become more aware of your movement patterns and your recruitment patterns, but it helps us cue you on stuff. Because something as simple as a lunge can be done so many different ways, right? And one of these ways might work for you, one might not. Going forward with the knee past the toe, and I say this a lot, and I'm going to reiterate it, is not evil. It's not bad, but it is going to place a lot more strain on your quad, a lot more strain on your knee. And if you don't have the proper ankle mobility, that's where it becomes an issue, right? So we might cue more vertical shin angle. Okay. We might even just change where the placement of your weight on your foot is. We might change how wide you step out. And this doesn't mean that your form was bad. So please don't say, oh, my form is really good. We need you to film this, because if your form is really good, film it even more, because sometimes the more mobile somebody is, if you're hypermobile even, you can mimic really proper looking movement patterns and have really improper recruitment patterns, okay? So please, please, please film, okay? Just remember, foam rolling up to 1 minute, hold on any tight areas that tend to compensate for you. You wanna target any tight areas for you. Then mobilize the joints. You wanna focus on movement patterns you're going to include in your workout, muscles you're gonna include in your workout. Then activate any underactive muscles, especially muscle groups, obviously, that you're going to use in your workout is ideal. Okay. That goes before you then start training, but you got to be intentional. You cannot out mobility work improper movement patterns the rest of your life. So you need to be conscious of how you're moving otherwise. Okay. Any questions, comments, or concerns? And I'm going to grab Ryan's computer really quick and try not to knock anything up. Okay. Quad stretches, I have difficulty when doing the half kneeling and reaching around to grab my foot. So I use a towel to assist. No difficulty when I lay on my side, I can reach my foot. Okay, so probably partly the hamstring engagement. So this is where being intentional even with it. So think about how you're rocking forward. So it might be more back on the kneecap versus on the side, right? Also think about how you're trying to bring your foot in. Are you trying to hamstring it up? Okay, that might be part of it. Versus here, you're not trying to hamstring it up because it's easier for you to grab, right? So even here, think about still driving the hip forward, think about squeezing the glute. But I would tell you right here is probably positioning. So even try grabbing before, or use the towel to grab and then put your hand around it. But it's probably you're trying to actually hamstring curl it up, which could even be causing some of the issue. It might be how you're sitting back on your kneecap versus even rocking forward a little bit to set up. Okay, just because that might be part of it, the pressure on the kneecap, and your kneecap is like, I don't really like that. So even trying a little extra cushion underneath could help. Huh? I can sit here awkwardly for a few seconds, or if anybody has any questions.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
When the program is done, which I'm starting to get now, I'm starting to really think in those terms, and we're on our own and we're doing whatever weights we're doing or exercises, how do we know which mobility things we should be doing? Say it's leg day and we want to, how do we know what we should be doing?
So I would tell you, part of warm up is relaxing anything that could have become tight from previous workouts. So if you had to run, whatever else, you might address some of that. But you always want to think, what am I using that day? Okay, so if you're going to be doing lower body, most of the joints, everything down here, right? So you want to think, okay, what tends to be tight on me? What do I tend to struggle with being overused? Roll those things out. Then think, okay, am I doing a squat day? Am I doing a lunge day? Think about some of those movement patterns even to then address with dynamic stretching, and then do activation generally. I'll be completely honest, it's usually glutes. That's usually what you have to focus on for lower body, or back for upper body. But you would then want to activate anything else. So it's that simple, basically, in that you just want to think, okay, if I'm targeting these muscles, what tends to compensate in that area? And then what joints do I need to mobilize to include in my stretching, dynamic stretches for, and then activate the muscle groups that I know tend to not want to work during those workouts. And even just think 1 to 2 moves per thing can be good enough. And you can obviously do more, but hope that helped. Could I demo the world's greatest stretch? Sure. So guys, with the world's greatest stretch, and I have like a super long video on this, which I can also get you as well. When you do this, I'm going to be extra meticulous here because I think that intentionality in training is all too often ignored. But when you set up, spread your fingers, hands connection to the ground, okay? Think about all those fingers pressing in the ground. This is, as I said, gonna be a little annoyingly tediously detailed, but you're gonna press your hands in the ground. When you step outside, watch this, okay? You can move your foot in, you can move your foot wider, you can play around with that, but watch that, okay? So when you drop the elbow down to the instep, you're gonna feel your hip bow a little bit, and that's okay, but you do not want that foot coming up, okay? Because you do wanna think, how can I pause and not let other mobility come out of other areas? And when you do this, even be conscious of your back leg, okay? Think, am I squeezing that back glute as I drop the elbow down? Then engage your upper back as you rotate towards that leg. Even play around with your foot the first time you really do this. Think about squeezing the back glute, think about engaging the upper back, think about like, hey, am I doing this? Like even play around with that a little bit, see where your weight is, okay? Then when you bring your hand back down and you sit back, hinge at the hips, okay? I don't even need to reach to my leg technically because I know with hinging at my hips, I'm stretching out my hamstrings, okay? So you can, obviously, I'm not gonna like worry if you lean forward, if you wanna reach, that's great. But the point is you're hinging at the hips to push the butt back because that's what's creating the stretch, okay? And then you would move back forward, okay? Can I give you a summary of the Zoom? No, but you can rewatch the replay afterwards. The summary is foam rolling, stretching, and activation. But yes, you can rewatch the replay, guys, and you can actually play it at your own speed because I'm going to put it on YouTube so you can even slow it down if you want or speed it up. I like to speed stuff up so it goes faster. Hopefully that was super helpful, guys. Again, if you did miss anything, just watch back through once the replay is shared after I upload it right now. Have a fabulous Wednesday, guys, and a great rest of your week.